Bright Duty. Every student matters.
Hello students, I am Jitesh Gola and today we are going to start with Unit 5 of Class 11th Education, that is Constitutional Provisions relating to Education. The importance of this chapter for the student is to make them familiar with the provisions of the Constitution of India relating to education. Means what are the different provisions has been mentioned in our Indian Constitution which are in the reference to the education, which are related to the education in our country. Here the different topics are involved and we are going to discuss about these topics one by one. The free and compulsory education will be there. Education for minorities and religious instructions will be taken as the another topic. Then education of socially and educationally backward classes and education in mother tongue will be taken as the another topic. And after that the last topic will take here national languages are, and beside that the national languages are also going to be discussed in the same unit. Now, if we talk about the uniqueness of India, that is how it is different from the other countries. It lies in the fact that since ancient times, it has been known as a center for learning and education. This is not the new concept that was introduced to India or the Indian society. It goes back to years. It goes to years back. There are ample proofs that the foreigners used to come to India for learning much before the British colonized India. It was not that the Britishers were those who introduced this education system in our country. No. Although they improved, they brought so many changes in the same, but already it was prevailing in our nation, in our Indian land. It was already prevailing on our Indian land. And the examples that they have given that many of the foreigners used to come to get knowledge and learning from our country. Education in free India has been taken up in our constitution and it can be studied as a separate branch. Now, if we talk about after the independence in 1947, the changes and the more focus was paid on education. As we have talked about the different philosophers and the thinkers of India like Mahatma Gandhi and Rabindranath Tagore, we have studied in the previous unit how they were concerned about the education in our country and how they were concerned about the people of the country that education must be provided to them. And this is one of the important concern which can lead to the development of an individual as well as the development of the whole society. Indian Constitution also covers the topic of education thoroughly and in depth. In details, the provisions are mentioned related to this education. A study of Indian Constitution may help us to know our rights to education. Because it was the need of the hour. At the time after independence, it was realized that education system must be strong and the appropriate one, which can lead to the development of the people of the country, which can help them to be self-reliant and self-sufficient. And while formulating educational provisions in the Constitution, our political, social, economical and the cultural needs have been taken into consideration. It was not the single or the one-sided step or the one-sided decision was taken. No. All the aspects, we can say, all aspects were included in that, related to political, social, economic as well as the cultural aspects. These have served as ideals to be achieved on the basis of educational development. We shall study them in the details in this chapter and we have to understand that how these served as the ideals on the basis of education, how it helped all these aspects helped us to attain the better outcome out of this education. So the first topic of this chapter, this unit we are going to take, that is free and compulsory education. Clear? When it was realized that education must be provided, then the one thing came along with that it should be compulsory for all. It should not like be that based on the choice. It should not given any option of choice. It should be compulsory for all. But when we are going to make it compulsory, as understanding the socio-economic condition of our country, it was not possible to make it compulsory for all because everyone was not able to afford it. So the another feature was added with that, it was free also. In 1910, when India was not free country, Shri Gopal Krishna Gokhale, he tried to pass a bill for making the education compulsory, but he was not successful at that time. It was not possible to make the education compulsory as already we were under the control of Britishers, and it was not easy to initiate such kind of changes in the Indian society at that time. Although this was the great step taken by Shri Gopal Krishna Gokhale. His desire was fulfilled in free India. Later on, after 1947, this desire which was aroused in his mind was ultimately implemented with Article 45 of Directive Principles of State Policy. These are the articles you need to remember, you need to learn because that help you out to match it with the particular provision. Clear? So, Article 45 of Directive Principles of State Policy, which states, what is mentioned under that? The state shall endeavour to provide within a period of 10 years from the commencement of the Constitution for free and compulsory education for all the children until they complete the age of 14 years. So, this sort of provision was adopted that until and unless the children are not attaining the age of 14 years, they should have access to free and compulsory education. Now, universalization of primary education by 1960, but it was not that much easy to initiate that idea all over the country. Idea was started, but it was not implemented successfully. Then slowly and gradually the steps and the efforts were going on, and if we talk about the universalization of this primary education was attained during 1960. Universal primary education suffered due to the lack of adequate funds because simply making the laws is not going to bring the change in the society, but until and unless you are not implementing it, it will not give you any outcomes. So, here some problems were there. Here if we talk about the problems occurred related to this primary education that was suggested as a free and compulsory one. The lack of adequate funds was the one problem. Increasing population, the continuously growing population was also creating the problem. Resentment against girl education. Resentment against girls' education was also the biggest problem in Indian society because the people were not in the favor of providing the education to girls, and still in many of the areas you won't find any schools for the girls' education. Fast growing population was the biggest problem that free India had to face because while the area is confined and you have planned here that you have to provide the free and compulsory education here, but if that number will increase, what will happen? You have to have the adequate funds also, all the facilities you need to provide. So, that was not that much easy to implement that idea so that the success could be achieved. The development in the area of education could never be proportionate as compared to the demand due to the rapid growth of population. So, here if we were looking for that development in the education. So somewhere the problem were occurred due to the increasing population. The gap was widening. When government opened schools for 2000 children, there were 4000 students in the line waiting to be admitted. Means lack of institution was there due to the increasing population. Although the government was doing all sort of efforts they were trying to implement this policy successfully, but somewhere the problems were occurring. The condition of the general public was such that they could not afford to send their children to school, and this was due to their poor financial position. So it was not possible. As we have already discussed, the socio-economic condition, even after independence, if we talk about, the condition was not that much good, that people were self-reliant or self-sufficient. So their condition was poor and they were not able to afford the education for their children. Poor parents were eager to send their child to places of work from where they could earn. Because of their poverty, they were forced to send their children to places of work, to factories, some industries. Here we talk about the child labor concept was introduced, and just because of the poverty. So obviously, if at that age the children were sent to these industries and factories, they were earning the money out of that. So why the poor people are going to send them to school? Just to waste their time over there, because they were not able to understand the importance of education, and secondly they were not having the fund to send them, or they were not having the finance to send their children to school. For them, education was non-productive and an additional burden on them, because when they will start going to school, according to these poor people, they were thinking their children will not earn anything, they will remain in the school, and secondly it is going to be the additional burden on them. Financially, they are not going to get any support, neither they are going to earn anything, and secondly they have to pay for the education of their children. Majority of parents were forced to send them to fields for work or to animal farms with a hope that they would bring some money for family. So the mindset of the poor people was that if they are going to send their children to earn the money from the fields or industries or some other areas, or they are going to the farm with the hope that they would be getting the money out of it. So that is better as compared to sending them to school, where non-productivity will be there, they won't be earning anything, and secondly they have to pay the money for them. So they took the second option. This was taken as the second option, which they took, or which they think is much more better as compared to the first one. Many parents were illiterate, were uneducated, and were against the education of girls. So out of the population, if we talk about, many of the parents were uneducated or illiterate. They don't understand the importance of education, and somewhere if they were understanding, so they were not in the favor of education of their girl child. They were of the opinion that girls were meant to cook, clean and look after the children. So there was hardly any need to educate girls. So this was the conservative mindset of the people, which was putting the restriction to this kind of idea. Girls' life was restricted to 4 walls of the home, because they were considered the homely product, where they are only supposed to be involved in the household activities. They were not supposed to go out from the house to get the education, and somehow if they were getting that education, they were not allowed to move up for the higher education. Some people of the view that the girls might go out of the control after getting education in the school. So this also shows or reflects the conservative mindset of the people. They were thinking that if the girls will go out of the home, somewhere they are going to have the negative impact on their life and they will out of the control. They openly criticize the idea of universalization of education. So these critics those who were very well present in the Indian society, they were not in the favor of universalization of education for both girls and boys. That's why this idea of universalization was slowed down. Government also, if we talk about, faced many problems, like many villages were too small for opening a school and they were scattered too. Means it was not easy to open up the school and just bring all them together as a part of the one institution. The number of children in some villages were less than the required for opening a school. If a school was opened for many villages, then there was the problem of bridging the distance from a school to village, because at that time improper transport system was there, other facilities were not there, so that the children from one village from one village to another could move easily. So all these problems were also occurring, although the efforts were going on, but somewhere the problems were arising which were leading as the restrictions to these ideas. Illiterate parents were indifferent towards opening school in the villages, and those who were illiterate, those who were uneducated, they were not having any say in this kind of idea. Means they were not concerned about these sort of schools. Often they even opposed the idea of a school in the village, and many of them even, because until and unless the person is not educated or illiterate, they won't be able to understand the idea of education. They won't be able to understand the importance of education, and this kind of thing happened with most of the parents. That's why they were opposing the idea to open up the schools in the villages. What will we get? So, who will feed us? These questions were frequently asked by the villagers, that if our children are going to attend the school, then what we are going to get out of that? What will be our earnings? Because as we have seen that many of them were sending them on the farms or the fields or other work areas from where they were earning in their early age. Whenever there was a proposal to open a school, these kind of questions were very common in front of government or the authority. They preferred the presence of their children in field for doing agricultural work rather than ending them in school, because they know that if they are going to send them in school, school for them was non-productive institution which is not going to give them anything in return. Whereas if they are going to send their children to agricultural field to work, definitely they would be earning and they would be able to fulfill their needs. Young children were sent to fields for working there so that they might render financial help to their parents, and for that concept only they were forced to send their children to fields so that financially they could help their parents. To fulfill the much cherished dream of free education, huge funds were required, and if we are planning for this free education, because making the education compulsory was not possible. It was not possible for all the parents to afford it and send their children to the school, and where they would be able to fulfill their needs for filling the fees and all. So, this was the problem. But if we are talking about along with that compulsory, if this idea was suggested to provide the free education, so that was also not that much easy. The reason being because of the lack of funds. Lots of funds were required, but government was in a financial strain, as we were not that much financially strong that we could initiate this idea of free education. The government was not able to pay attractive salaries to teachers due to the lack of fund, because if we are planning to open up the school, definitely many of the people will be employed, the teachers will be required, and if the teachers will be appointed, then the fund is also required to pay them the appropriate salary. Otherwise, nobody would be taking any interest in being the part of such kind of institution from where they are not getting or earning the appropriate salaries. Therefore, it remained a dream for a very long time. So idea and all this sort of thought was there that we have to provide this free and compulsory education, but lots of problems were occurring which restricted it to bring in the reality. After 70 years of independence, if we talk about, India is developing tremendously in the field of education and has developed in some area. So if we talk about that after independence, after 1947, after the 70 years, if we discuss here, that India was turning as a superpower, as a part of the superpower, and development could be seen in tremendous manner. Now there are primary schools even in the remote village of India where children, irrespective of their caste, higher or lower, creed and economic status, they study together in the same classroom. Because these were also the problem, the caste system, the division of the Indian society on the basis of different caste also was the problem, which was not allowing the parent to send their children, especially the higher class parents were not in the favor of sending their children with the low class children. So the changes were brought with a period of time, and now all this kind of discrimination, that no discrimination was there on the caste, creed or their economic status, and ultimately these primary schools were opened up in most of the villages where they all were getting the education together. This concept of free and compulsory education for all the children comes under the directive principles of state policy. It means that it is the duty of the government to implement it so that each and every child can get access to education. So this is the responsibility of the government, central government as well as, means both the government here if we talk about, whether it is the central or the state government, both are having the responsibility to provide the appropriate access to the education to their people. But it did not give any guarantee to the citizen regarding the right to education. Here only the law was initiated that free and compulsory education must be there, but according to that no such sort of guarantee was attached with the same. That's why to bring that right to education, what was done? In August 2009, the Parliament passed a bill that was right to education as one of the basic right, which is also known as RTE, right to education. And it is the right of the every Indian citizen to get free education up to the age of 14 years. So, all the other fundamental rights we have, so this right was also added along with the same, and according to this act, according to this right to education, all the Indian citizens were having the equal access to get the education up to the age of 14 years. Means the concept of this basic education was taken here. Means at least that basic education must be provided to these children. That should be free of cost. Now we are going to discuss about some of the major constitutional provisions on education in India, which we'll discuss here. So, based on that constitutional provision means the provision that has been mentioned in our constitution. There are some changes regarding the 42nd amendment to the constitution. So, bringing the change in that education policy, some changes were done or some changes were adopted as the 42nd change in our Indian constitution that was related to education in India. In 1976, our constitution was amended in many of its fundamental provisions. Means in many of its provisions, the different changes were brought. Under the Constitution of India, the central government has been specifically vested with several education responsibilities. Means central government was having the more responsibility as compared to state government to look into the matter of education and working on the efforts to bring the proper education system in our Indian society. The first one we are taking here. The first one, the measure under the constitutional provision, we can take that free and compulsory education. The constitution makes the following provision under the article 45 of the directive principles of a state policy, and according to that, what is the main motto? The state shall endeavour to provide within a period of 10 years from the commencement of this constitution, that is for free and compulsory education for all the children until they attain the age of 14 years. So this kind of provision was adopted under free and compulsory education. This, the expression state which occurs in this article is defined in article 12 to include the government and the parliament of India and the government and the legislature of each of the state. Means not only the state term, doesn't mean the state government they are talking to, no, they are referring to the government and the parliament of India as well as the government and the legislature of each of the states and all the local or the other authorities within the territory of India or under the control of the government of India. This is the responsibilities of all these bodies. Not only the single unit is going to be responsible for providing the education in India. It is clearly directed in article 45 of our constitution that the provision of universal, free and compulsory education becomes the joint responsibility of the center as well as the state government. So this is one of the subject, if we talk about, this is one of the subject, education is the subject which is involved in our union list as well as in the state list, which shows that it is the concern for union government or the central government as well as for the state government. In the constitution, it was laid down that within 10 years, that is by 1960, universal compulsory education must be provided for all the children up to the age of 14 years. But it was not that much easy, and unfortunately this directive could not be fulfilled. Vigorous efforts are needed to achieve the target of 100% primary education, because at that time, if we talk about, the problems were related to the fund. Lack of fund was there. Besides that, the growing population was also creating the problem in matching all these efforts. So, the central government needs to make adequate financial provisions for the purpose. So, it was required the separate budget must be introduced for the fulfillment of this provision. At the present rate of progress, it may, however, be expected that the directive may be fulfilled by the end of this century. So, somewhere they are calculating all the things and they have the things in their mind that might be by the end of this century they would be able to achieve their target of providing the primary education to the children in India.